Welcome to the Alliance series of webinars giving you a crash course in the main road safety key risk areas. The Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety is committed to reaching the UN Sustainable Development Goals target of halving the number of deaths by 2020. There's therefore an urgent need to focus on evidence-based strategies to reduce road deaths. Who is better positioned to share best practices and main messages within proven risk areas than the Alliance members? This webinar will give you a crash course in prevention of drunk driving. And we have turned to our member in the US, Matt, who will give you an overview of basic facts and key messages on drunk driving. Before I hand it over to Nick Ellinger from Matt, I just want to highlight that this is a series of a number of webinars which is covering key risk areas, and you can see the list here. We have also collected a number of resources for you to explore further. You can find them on our website, which is shown here. This is also where you pose your questions and evaluate the webinar. I would like to hand it over to you, Nick. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me today. It's a pleasure to talk to folks around the world who are dedicated to the fight against traffic deaths. We at MAD are totally in support of the goal of halving deaths by 2020, and we're really looking to entirely eliminate the violent crime of drunk driving within our lifetimes. So what we're going to talk about today is first talk a little bit about what drunk driving is and how that varies from country to country, and then also some similarities. And then how to prevent drunk driving. There's a way to prevent it among the general population. There's a way that we can all individually make better decisions about drunk driving. And then there's a body of research around how to prevent drunk driving from those who have already committed the crime. How do you prevent someone who has driven drunk from doing so again? And then finally, we'll close up with some resources on what you can do and how you can learn more about drunk driving and the issue. One thing that we always like to do at MAD is start all of our presentations with a mission moment to talk about why we do what we do. And so I'd like to play for you MAD's Victim Services PSA.
Even though there's an empty seat, our son will always have a place at our table.
Even though the holidays will never be the same, my sister will always have a place in our family.
Even though life goes on, my mom will always have a place in my heart.
For victims of drunk and drug driving, our grief is unique. But you are not alone. You always have a place at MAD. Call our 24-hour victim helpline at 877-MAD-HELP or visit mad.org.
So the families featured in that ad are Gwendolyn and Louis Edwards, whose son Jared was killed in a drunk driving crash in November 2010. Joshua Tisdale, a young boy whose mother Kelly was killed as a pedestrian in a drug driving crash, someone who was driving under the influence of drugs, in September 2011. And then you saw Hermelinda and Juan Martinez, whose sister Maria Vasquez, who was killed by a drunk driver on Father's Day in the United States in 2012. And then the person speaking at the end is our MAD National President, Colleen Sheehy Church. Her son Dustin was killed by a drunk and drugged driver in July 2004. So there's a common bond among all of them that they wish they didn't have, drunk and drunk driving tragedies, all of which were 100% preventable. And so those faces, those names, and those families are why we do what we do, so that we can prevent this crime from happening to others. You also saw in the ad that MAD helps victims of drunk and drug driving. We provide a service to a victim or survivor every 3 minutes in the US. So it's a problem that we say we want no more victims. We want to be there for the victims of these violent crimes until that great day when there are no more. So talking about what drunk driving is, this does vary a little bit country by country, but there's a lot of commonalities among the laws. So the laws break down into two halves. First, you have what are called per se laws, which are named by lawyers, so they have to use Latin, I think, by law. But what that means is that it is illegal to drive over a certain blood alcohol concentration level. So if a law enforcement officer pulls you over, in the U.S., you would talk with them, you would go through standardized field sobriety tests that indicate whether or not you are impaired, things like one leg stand, those sorts of things. And then you would go through either a breath or blood test to indicate your blood alcohol concentration, or BAC level. And if that's above a 0.08 in the United States, that in and of itself is illegal to be driving on the roads with that illegal blood alcohol concentration. The other aspect of drunk driving law is you can be arrested for driving under the influence, and that's commonly used in cases where there either is no BAC, or if blood testing does not come up with a specific method of impairment. So, for example, in the United States, a decent portion of drivers, when asked to provide a breath or blood sample, will refuse, and there is not, in a lot of cases, time to get a warrant to get that sample. So instead of having a BAC level involved, the law enforcement officer and the prosecutors will charge them with driving under the influence, and then it will be proving that the person was under the influence of a substance and that caused them to drive in an unsafe manner. And so you'll see evidence that says this person was swerving, they were changing lanes erratically, they weren't signaling, they were driving too fast or too slow, they hit a curb, those sorts of things. Most laws have both aspects of them, and almost everywhere in the U.S. at least, with one state exception of South Carolina, when you're charged with driving under the influence, a person can charge, the prosecutor will charge you with driving under the influence generally, and how they make their case, whether it's under the per se law or just driving under the influence, is up to them. Now, I say there's a per se limit, but in fact in a lot of places around the world, there can be different blood alcohol concentrations that are illegal for commercial drivers, that is truck drivers or people who drive professionally, inexperienced drivers, or those under the legal age of drinking. There can be high BACs at which additional penalties come in. So in a lot of states in the United States, if you are above a 0.15, and we'll talk a little bit about what these BACs mean, you can get additional penalties over and above a normal drunk driving conviction. And then some areas have different BACs if you're driving with children in the vehicle. We wanted to talk a little bit about what the BACs mean. At a point, at MED, we are in favor of, in the United States, the 0.08 blood alcohol concentration limit. But we do talk, being illegal, but we do talk about impairment being, impairment starting with the first drink. So at a 0.02, which is usually the first or second drink, depending on your physical makeup, you are already starting to feel a little bit warm, a little bit relaxed. There's change in mood. You have more trouble dividing your attention between multiple things, and your visual centers are not as fast as once they were. At a 0.05, you have additional challenges with coordination. You can't track moving objects, and since driving is little but a series of tracking moving objects, that's obviously problematic, and reduced response times. And then when you get into a 0.08, this is the level that everyone is clearly very impaired in the United States. At this point, you're somewhere between 8 and 11 times more likely to be involved in a fatal crash at a 0.08, because your concentration, your memory, your control of speed, and your perception are all breaking down at that point. For perspective, a 0.08 is, for a 170-pound man, that's 4 standard drinks in 1 hour on an empty stomach. For a 137-pound woman, it's 3 drinks in 1 hour on an empty stomach. So it's not social drinking, it's someone who is likely attempting to get drunk. We'd like to look a little bit about per se limits around the world. They vary greatly. There are a good number of states that make it illegal to drive with a 0.02 or less, sort of the any measurable amount of alcohol in your system test. Again, these vary all across the world. Probably the most common per se limit is a 0.05 that you'll see if you can go to the next slide. You'll see in large parts of Europe, there's really at least one country on almost every continent that has a 0.05 limit. And then 0.08 is slightly less common, but you do see this in a decent number of countries. So those are the most common, but there are some countries that have their own BAC limit. As you can see, your country likely falls into one of these. I apologize if I don't have your country in here. I was able to find most of them, but not all of them in terms of drunk driving laws. But the common thread remains that what we're trying to do is prevent people from driving once they have had too much to drink, once they are past a point of significant impairment, and prevent them from hurting themselves or others. Unfortunately, that happens all too commonly. In the United States alone, almost 10,000 people are killed each year in drunk driving crashes. That is above a 0.08 level. And about 290,000 people are injured in those crashes. The number killed is about 31% of all traffic fatalities in the United States are drunk driving fatalities. This is usually a little bit ahead of most industrialized nations, but you see a lot of countries in the 20% range there. The way that we get these numbers is a challenge in and of itself. What the data collection starts with fatal crashes. We try to get, and most states' laws require, testing of all drivers who are killed in fatal crashes, as well as all drivers who are involved in fatal crashes who survive. Unfortunately, only about 2/3 of drivers who are killed and only about 1/3 of drivers who survive are actually tested, even though it's quite frequently required. So in the US, it's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA for short. They collect all this data and then they put it through some statistical modeling to say what would the BACs have been in the crashes that didn't have testing involved, and fill in the blanks. So a person who is a male 22-year-old driving at 2 in the morning who's involved in a single vehicle crash, even if that person isn't tested, it's very likely that that person was involved in driving drunk, whereas a 50-year-old person in a multi-car crash at noon is much less likely. And so that statistical methodology fills in the blank. That's helping to overcome some but not all of the data challenges. And across the world you see significant data challenges in trying to get data on what drunk driving is. So I wanted to list a few ways that you can get good data. Before NHTSA did this statistical methodology, researchers in the United States used to use a proxy for whether different efforts were impacting drunk driving. And they used single vehicle nighttime crashes because they found that if it's a crash that happened in the night and only one person was involved, that's very likely to be a drunk or drugged driving crash. And so that's a way that in many countries you can do research on your countermeasures without having broad-based drunk driving numbers. Other ways to get numbers, local law enforcement agencies will have it. They will have arrest data, and sometimes they will have crash and fatality data. The challenge there is trying to get that to aggregate, and so one of the roles of nonprofits often is to work for better data systems, but also to help collect the data. Courts are a valuable source of data. In the United States, you see conviction rates in drunk driving that vary from 99% in some courts to 10% in other courts. And so we take a look at that to say, are judges actually enforcing the law in a lot of cases? Health systems and hospitals will know who's coming in and out of their emergency rooms, and will have a good feel for the impact that drunk driving is having on them. And then surveys of the general population. People are, when it's an anonymous survey, surprisingly forthcoming about whether they drive drunk. And so we know that in the United States, 28 million people on average admit to driving drunk every single year. So it's a significant problem and one that we're working to eradicate. So the question is how? The big ideal goal is to prevent drunk driving among the general population, and the way that biggest way you can do that is with enforcement. We talk about a three-legged stool of enforcement, where sanctions prevent crime as long as they're meaningful sanctions, meaning something that someone doesn't want to part with. That can be freedom in terms of jail time, that can be fines, that can be loss of a driver's license, whatever is meaningful for that person. So second one is if they're certain, that is, if you're arrested, that you're likely to be arrested, and if you're arrested, you're likely to be convicted. And then swift, meaning that the sanctions that are very strong are ones that happen as close as possible to the instance of drunk driving. We call this a three-legged stool because if any one of those legs is too short, sanctions are meaningful, and they're certain, but they take years to implement, that stool is going to fall over. People are going to come up with rationalizations in their mind, and those sanctions won't be as meaningful for them. And so what enforcement does, and publicity about that enforcement, is it increases that perception of, am I going to be arrested? Am I going to be convicted? The biggest tool that you can have for this are sobriety checkpoints. In the United States, we do selective testing checkpoints, which is you set up a checkpoint and you ask for a test from every second, third, fourth, or some number driver. Just having those out there and having those publicized reduces deaths by 9% and has a positive cost-benefit analysis. And I've put numbers in here, but I wouldn't worry so much about the numbers, but to know that the cost-benefit on all of the things that I'm going to be talking about is positive. You get more out of them than you put into them. In other parts of the world, there are random breath testing checkpoints. Australia is very well known for those, and that is where a law enforcement officer can pull you over and ask you to breathe. Those are also very effective in reducing drunk driving. Looking at educational campaigns, there's not a lot of evidence that specific education media campaigns, this is what drunk driving is and what it does, actually work to reduce drunk driving. But what does work is, if you have enforcement, is educating about that enforcement. So if you run an ad saying, don't drive drunk because it will kill people, that may or may not have an impact. But if you run an ad that says, don't drive drunk because if you do, you might kill someone and you'll be arrested for it and you'll get these penalties, that can cause a significant decrease in alcohol-related crashes, increase knowledge of the laws, and they're also very cost-effective campaigns. Almost all of them have paid for themselves that we've seen. Another solution that works among the general population is to raise the drinking age. The U.S. has one of the highest drinking ages in the world at 21. And part of the reason for that is we lowered our drinking ages in the 70s in conjunction with the 60s and 70s in conjunction with the Vietnam War. And we saw immediate increases in drunk driving deaths when the drinking age was lowered to 18. So that increased drunk driving crashes by an average of 10%. When we raised it from 18 to 21, state by state, we saw a decrease in drunk driving crashes by an average of 16%. So that has had a significant impact in the United States, and may or may not be appropriate for your country, but it is a proven solution. Looking at personal prevention, obviously as individuals we can all take steps to prevent drunk driving. The first and foremost one is plan how you're going to get home before you go out, whether that is rideshare, public transportation, cab, a non-drinking designated driver, whatever that is. Having that plan before you go out and preaching that gospel, talking about that in your messaging is very effective. In fact, in the United States, they tested taking one group of offenders and telling them not to drink, and taking another group of drunk driving offenders and telling them to plan how they were going to get home before they go out. And the group that had that messaging reduced their future drunk driving by 50%, so it's very powerful messaging. The other thing that we can do is we can be that non-drinking designated driver. So if you're going out with a group of friends, if there are 5 friends, everyone takes turn being that driver. Everyone loves the person that gets them home safe. So everyone can forego that at some points to make sure that we're doing the right things for ourselves and our society. Then looking at how there's a specific body of research on how you can prevent drunk driving among those people who have committed the crime of drunk driving already. In the U.S., repeat offenders are about 1/3 of the drunk driving problem. They're likely to have driven drunk before, they're likely to drive drunk again, and there's likely to be some sort of underlying problem with alcohol going on here. So it's definitely a group that we want to address. Using license sanctions, that is taking away a person's driver's license, ideally administratively, it has been shown to significantly reduce drunk driving, and it's very cost effective. If you can go to the next slide, those license sanctions are especially important when they're swift and certain. What you can do is there's usually a judicial process that has to be gone through for a drunk driving conviction. But in a lot of places, you can take away a person's license administratively. That is, the certifying authority, Department of Motor Vehicles, Department of Transportation, can say, because you had a positive PAC or because you refused a BAC test, we're taking away your license on the spot. And that has a strong deterrent effect. What it doesn't do, however, is it doesn't prevent the person from driving. In the U.S., 50 to 75% of people who have their license taken away for driving drunk will continue to drive anyway. So there are other things that are also needed, including criminal sanctions. Criminal sanctions are a necessary part of deterrent effect. They're meaningful sanctions, generally speaking. However, most studies indicate that increasing a fine or increasing jail time doesn't do a whole lot to increase a deterrent effect. It may look good in legislation, but if you're pushing for better laws, it's probably best to focus on license sanctions, addressing some of the underlying problems with alcohol, and in technology that I'll talk about in a second. Speaking of addressing underlying problems with alcohol, treatment does work. It reduces repeat offenses by an average of 9% for those people who do complete treatment. However, the challenge is that very few people do complete treatment. And so probation, parole, all of the courts are trying to focus in on making sure that they can make sure a person went to the treatment that they were sentenced to, that they follow through, and that at the end they have a certification that they completed it. That happens in very few cases, but when it does, it's very effective. And it helps that offender with other parts of their lives as well. Chances are if they have an underlying problem with alcohol, it's not just showing up when they're driving drunk, it's showing up in other areas of their lives. Now looking at technology, there's a technology called ignition interlocks. MAD has a campaign to eliminate drunk driving in the United States, and interlocks are the second part of that. We know that because someone is going to drive without a license when their license is suspended, that it's very good if you can get an ignition interlock on the car, a device that someone has to breathe into, and it proves whether or not they have alcohol in their system. And so that type of system is appropriate for someone who has driven drunk and wants to be able to prove that they should be able to drive legally and safely in the future. That reduces future offenses by 2/3, and it's effective for first-time offenders, it's effective for repeat offenders, it's been tested in a number of different countries, and so it's really a very strong solution. And we generally find that the cost of an ignition interlock per day is much less than the cost of alcohol that someone drank to get to their illegal BAC. So it's a cost-effective solution as well. And then the ultimate goal is to have advanced technology eliminate drunk driving. We know that in the future there are going to be drunk driving proof cars. We can help build the social willingness to have those cars, but since it's far enough off in the future, we need to also focus on what's going to save lives here and now. And the big thing that you'll see there is the power of NGOs. Looking at what MAD's done in the United States, since our founding in 1980, drunk driving deaths have been cut in half. We've saved over 300,000 lives and served 780,000 victims of drunk and drugged driving during that time. That's a type of impact that someone working outside the government who's passionate about these issues can have. And so we strongly urge and would love to help support any NGOs that want to work on this issue worldwide. Some of the things that those NGOs can do, or you can do as private citizens, is grassroots advocacy. MAD does lobby days all across the country where we bring people together to lobby for more effective legislation. We also have letter writing campaigns, calling campaigns. We work with legislators in our home district, and our members make sure that their representatives know, I believe in an end to drunk driving and I vote, and I am that type of advocacy really helps open eyes. There are a lot of legislators out there who want to do the right thing but don't have the time to look through all of the research, and so you can also be that filter for them. You can go in and say, here's what the research supports, and a lot of legislators will go along with that. A lot of legislators also will not go along with that, and so that's where working on having constituents calling and making sure that the people's voice is heard can be so very powerful. That advocacy doesn't stop at the legislative level. It also happens at the judicial level. MAD has done petitions to make sure that offenders get the sentences they deserved. One prominent case recently here has been that a young person who was drunk and hit and killed people and injured several others, never saw the inside of a jail, and as a result he continued to drink and violate his probation, and when it looked like he was going to go to jail, he fled to Mexico. He was extradited, and we wanted to make sure that he faced a punishment for his crimes, and so we had over 50,000 petitions that went to the judge in that case asking that he be tried as an adult and that he have significant jail time. And that worked. He had the maximum sentence allowed by that judge. That's one example, but really what the big example is MAD does court monitoring programs all across the country where we have volunteers who sit in courtrooms and record what is done in drunk driving cases, because you can pass all the laws you want, but if they are not enforced by the judiciary and the judicial system, then they're not worth the paper they're printed on. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. I wanted to give you some resources where you can learn more. The Centers for Disease Control in the United States publishes a great resource on not just drunk driving issues, but all manner of issues in traffic safety in its community guide. And they will go through all of the research, look at whether it's good or bad, and compile it for you and say, we strongly recommend this, we recommend it, or there's not enough evidence. So it's a way of keeping a good eye on whether you're doing the things that are going to make a difference. Similarly, the World Health Organization has a really good international good practice manual for drunk driving that goes into far more detail than I did on how you can analyze the data of your situation and then look at solutions that are going to specifically address the issues you have. You may not have a problem with your judiciary. You may have a problem with people refusing blood tests or not having the facilities to be able to do BAC testing. Their guide will help you find those loopholes in your law and its enforcement. And then ICATS, the International Council on Alcohol, Drugs, and Traffic Safety, has a good amount of research on alcohol and drugs and all throughout the world, what's working, what hasn't worked. And then for a U.S. example, I have to give a plug to Mothers Against Drunk Driving in the United States. We have a number of statistics, and if you can't find it on that webpage, chances are we have it somewhere, so feel free to drop us a line, and we're always happy to help. The big thing that I would encourage is for you to get involved at mad.org regardless of where you live. You can sign up for more information. You can sign a pledge for the campaign to eliminate drunk driving and a pledge that says you're going to drive safely. You'll get updates from us on what we're doing in the United States, and maybe it's something you want to try and we can help do that. It can also help you volunteer. We do victim advocacy training because it takes a special type of person and a special type of training to be able to help people who have been impacted by drunk driving. So we offer that training. And since I am in our development department, I have to make a plug that says, if you would like to donate to MAD, we would love to have your support. And then likewise, we're happy to help your efforts anywhere in the world. So to sum up, hopefully as a result of this, you know that drunk driving is absolutely preventable. It's a choice that everyone makes. We talk about it being a crash and not an accident. Data collection is challenging, but it's important. It drives all of our other efforts. And we need to address differently the general population from people who have shown that they are going to violate the drunk driving laws. And it's vital and important that passionate people join forces in constructive ways to help address the issue of drunk driving. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope this is valuable for you, and feel free to drop me a line if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this presentation.
So thank you very much, Nick. So just is your email address on the front on the first slide?
I believe it is, but in case
repeat it.
Oh, it is not. I'm looking back and it is not. So my email address is Nick, N-I-C-K, dot Ellinger, E-L-L-I-N-G-E-R, at mad, that's M-A-D-D, .org. And my apologies for not including that in the presentation.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to reach out to Nick and you for some reason don't know how to do it, you just reach out to me. You can find all addresses on our website there. So this webinar is available online, and you can go back and you can listen to it as many times as you like. And if you wish to learn more, we have collected a number of resources which can be found on our website as well. And as Nick said, you can also reach out to Matt and to Nick directly, and I'm sure you can also find Nick's and his colleagues' emails and contacts on their website. Overall, I encourage you to use the excellent expertise that you can find in our group. We have some great people. You can see we have some very passionate people who are the specialists in the areas that we're talking about. So please visit our website, www.roadsafetynGOs.org, and under the empowerment page you can find all information about our offerings. Thank you very much for listening, and have a safe day.